So, without further ado, why don't we go ahead and turn our attention to the first panel of the day. And of course, it's about technology, a hot topic in the world of football, and one in which is increasingly ever present within the sports. You have VAR, you have goal line technology, you have Hawkeye, you have tracking systems, take your pick, a wide variety of technological advancements, so much so that they become regular features within football, right? Major advances that it almost seems as though it would be impossible to imagine what modern football would look like without them at this point in time. And like anything in the tech world, it's ever evolving, it's growing, it's changing, and at a very rapid pace. So that's why our first chat for today is all about understanding how football is changing in the times of innovation and technology. So please help me in giving a warm welcome to our first panel of the day. I'd like to welcome out to the stage now our moderator, Bastian Schnatter, CEO, Fan Engagement Consultancy. Hello, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning, good morning. Please come take your seat. I think it's over here.
That's
or you have 5 options to choose from. You can sit wherever you like.
Speakers need to sit there, so.
Perfect.
Cool, thanks.
All right, I'd also like to introduce Alex Bielefeld, Director of Global Policy and Strategic Relations from FIFPro.
Thank you.
Hello, Alex.
Hi.
Welcome. Good morning.
Welcome. Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Maheta Molango, the CEO of the PFA.
Should we go in the middle?
Yeah.
Hello, good morning. Please take it away whenever you're ready.
Yeah, welcome. Welcome everyone, good morning. In case you guys wonder why is he on his phone, that's my notes. So, no paper, it's all ecological. Yeah, welcome to Istanbul. Amazing. Tomorrow, big event, of course. So this is amazing place to gather, to discuss how the industry is doing. First of all, I think it's nice to just, for who doesn't know you guys, get a short introduction to share a bit on what you're doing in your organization. Alex, if you would go first.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us and for welcoming us here in Istanbul. It's fantastic to be in the city for the events over the next days, and fantastic to be here at the World Football Summit, of course. Look, I'm working for FIFPro. FIFPro is the global association of player unions representing the interests of players collectively in the professional men's and women's game on everything basically that affects their world of work. And that can range obviously from human rights questions connected to the World Cup in Qatar, for example, to issues related to equality and equal pay when it comes to the Women's World Cup, or issues around technology, financial sustainability. All of that affects the world of work of professional players. And we represent our network of unions at the international level. And our strength actually comes from the colleague who sits next to me.
Cool, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, pleasure to be here in Istanbul with our Turkish friends, especially having one of our board members who actually is from Turkey, Ebru. In my case, I am the CEO of the Professional Football Association, which is the union representing players in England, both male and female, that is covers the Premier League, Championship, League One, League Two, and WSL. In a previous life, I was a player, not a very good one, but I was one. And after that, I was for 4 years the CEO of Real Mallorca in Spain. So I've seen the data situation from different angles, and I think it's a very relevant topic to discuss today, because I think we're at a crossroad in terms of what we've done, but also what we'll do going forward. So great pleasure to be here with you guys today.
Interesting. So you can give us the perspective as well on when you were playing, how innovation was led, what was innovation back then and what's innovation right now. So that's a good contrast that we can make. That's nice. We're going to talk a lot about innovation, we're going to talk a lot about data, but let's first zoom out a bit, because I think it's good to get a bit of the perspective on what you're obviously defending the rights for professional football players. What we see that professional football players currently are, what's on their plate, what are they struggling with outside of being a football player, and what you guys represent. Can you, Alex or Maheta, whoever wants to take this question, can you share a bit more on what's currently a hot topic for them?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a generation of players who are much more aware of of the data that is around them. And I think the three main questions they're trying to address is what data is collected. I think there's a big question mark as to what is the data that is collected about myself as a player right now. The second one is for what purpose? Because I think a lot of players are not fully aware, that what is then done with that data that is collected about them. And the third one, which I think is the starting point, is on which basis, I think traditionally you'd sign a contract when I was playing that would just have a very small data collection clause. But that was data basically linked to your payroll, date of birth, your name, some basic information. It was never, at least that's what we defend, it was never thought to be, for this data then to be commercialized, or for the data to include, for example, how you sleep, or how you recover, etc. So what I've seen during the years that we've gone from collecting the data just in terms of my payroll, to all of a sudden collecting a host of data that you as a player are thinking, what's the scope of the consent that I've provided in the first place? I said, yes, you can collect my data, but first of all, which data?
Yeah.
And what was the extent of that consent? And I think that's the biggest concern that the players have. They're like, well, hold on a second. You are collecting data. I don't exactly know what you're doing with that data, but plus, I have not consented to you then going as far as you've done with my data. And I think this is the main source of concern right now, I would say.
Yeah. And before we go to Alex, if we dive in a bit deeper there, I think you had a fantastic case maybe 1 or 2 years ago with Kevin De Bruyne, who actually used his own data, I think, to upscale his contract. Who's owning the data, actually? If clubs are collecting so much data on their players, do the players in England get any say in, or any insights into their own data, apart from what helps them to perform better on the pitch? Do they have any ownership of that data? Can they use that themselves in negotiation with a new club, or a renegotiation with the same club? How does that work?
Well, I think data in the negotiation works both ways.
Yeah.
So I think the case of Kevin De Bruyne was able to use his own data for his own benefits. Although you could probably argue that if you're Kevin De Bruyne, maybe your data, you'll get a good contract anyway. But I think our concern is what happens the other way around. How does the data prevent me from getting a contract, or can actually impact me negatively in my contract negotiations? Yeah. So I think it is important to have that data. We're also very concerned about portability. So, my data seems to be with one club, then with the other, then with the other. Am I able to actually take this data with me on my journey as a player and then use that efficiently? Is it fair that ultimately data which is supposed to be for performance all of a sudden now is monetized by others to an extent that you cannot even imagine? I was surprised myself, not being an expert about data, of how much money is in the business around that. Insurance company, for example, find football players or sports athletes as a very good target for that because they are healthy. It's a good kind of benchmark for them. So yes, I think we've gone from very basic data to all of a sudden now, I remember when I was at the club in Mallorca, we're monitoring sleep. Yeah. So the guys would turn up in the morning and would be able to tell them how they slept during the night, no? Yeah. Is it what was envisaged in the first place? No, I'm not quite sure.
Nice. There's a lot to uncover there. I first want to go to Alex. Can you say as well, not from the English perspective, but the global perspective, what's on the plate of football players that you see?
Well, look, he's my board member, so he's technically my boss. So he has a very, very global perspective on things as well. Look, I think what Maheta said is absolutely right. I mean, we surveyed players, male and female, across a couple of different playing markets. And the feedback you get from players is, specifically the younger generation of players, is, yeah, we want our data, right? Mm-hmm. We want to have access to our data, and we want technology and innovation being integrated into this industry. And I think this is in general also what you can see. I think when you look at when we as an industry started to integrate technology into our industry, probably around 2012, that happened more systematically, and then it really accelerated over the past years, right? Specifically in the match environment. When you think about goal line technology, now semi-automated offside at the World Cup in Qatar as well. And players are really, really open to that. They want that. And I think that's the feedback probably also Maheta and people will get on the ground in the locker rooms, right? But the concern is, as Maheta said, is that while this first use case from a player perspective is always a positive one, the question is, okay, what are the other use cases how the data is used, how it's exploited, which the players are not necessarily aware of, and in which we as an industry also didn't really develop any standards or safeguards on how actually we want to deal with innovation and technology. I think this is the big frontier at the moment, which we're discussing with FIFA and with other stakeholders actually, is how can we integrate tech in a way that it actually benefits everyone in the ecosystem, from the players to the clubs to the fans. Because what is quite clear, if you look into the overall volume of the tech ecosystem, I think you probably, at the moment, I saw some valuations around the tech ecosystem globally across sports valued at 21 billion, with a growth pattern to go towards 40 million in a few years. And if you then look into the different segments, obviously a lot is in around fan engagement. The other bigger chunk is on stadium technology. And a very small part is actually athlete performance in terms of what is driving the value in the tech ecosystem. But when you then look, what do you need to drive fan engagement, you pivot back to the athlete data. You need what is at the source to actually talk to your audience. And all of that actually comes from the player, the movement on the pitch, the movement in training. And I think this is obviously why we need to have a much more holistic debate in the industry, which got to be player-centric.
I'm also guilty on that. I mean, I work in fan engagement, so indeed we want that player data as well, just to understand better as fans, to see how our team is doing. It can help you in all sorts of ways as a fan as well. Now, you mentioned earlier as well that mostly younger players want their data. Why is it specifically younger players, would you say? And do you also feel that because I sense a bit of this is a struggle where all the football organizations are now in discussion on how do we handle this. Is this going to lead at some point to an equivalent of a Bosman arrest, that we have an impact and all of a sudden we know there's clarity? Or is this a conversation that's still going and we're still trying to suss it out? And so it's two questions.
Look, let's start there. Does anyone have an idea of how many data points are being collected of players in a World Cup match? So let's say World Cup 2018 in Russia. Roughly, how many data points did we collect of a player? Anyone dares to guess? 1 million? That's good. So in 2018 in Russia, we had 130,000 data points being collected on a player.
Per game?
Per game, per player. Now in Qatar, it was closer, well, not closer, but you were closer than many other people before. We had 8 million data points being collected per player per match. Now, imagine what is happening in the training environment. Because the match environment is just every 5 days, every 7 days, right? But the amount of data we're collecting of a player in training, in his private house, you mentioned sleep surveys, right?
Yeah.
So the players are not aware of that. They're not aware of that, of those details. And I think this is the biggest battle which we need to address, because otherwise, probably if I would need to put my money somewhere, the next Bosman case probably would be around something with data and biometric data, health data, heart rate data, of course.
Yeah. Do you feel the same, Maheta? Do you think that's, I mean, you're his boss in the end, so you can overrule him, he cannot overrule you, but...
Obviously, you know, the reality is that we are living in this Moneyball type of world right now, where a lot of players are signed on the basis of data. And I think they're becoming more and more aware of that. I think around performance, for example, they're really obsessed about how many kilometers I ran, at which intensity, because a lot of the coaches actually, you know, assess their performance based on that data. So you see people sometimes, you know, running to do a throw-in to have more kind of kilometers covered in terms of what they do at the end of the game. But then commercially, I think there's a lack of awareness of what exactly you can do with that data and what you can generate around that. And I think it's fair to say that there is a big interest around that. And it's a different generation of people.
Yeah.
I think nowadays it's a generation, they want to understand what's going on, they want to be part of the discussion. It's fair to say they're probably smarter than we were when we were playing. It's a reality.
More native? The younger players are more native to data environments?
Yeah, and they expect to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, whereas maybe we're more kind of following instructions. You know, I could probably have we're probably a generation where, you know, if my boss said A, I would just say A. I wouldn't think about B and C and D. Those guys, they want to understand. They want to be part of the conversation. So it's a different approach, also in terms of education.
Can you also mention a couple examples that of data points that are being collected now that were not even close to where when you were playing?
Yeah. Well, to start off with the GPS, you know.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was playing, you know, if you played on a Saturday, then, you know, if you're a bit more veteran, then you had a game on the Saturday, next Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, managing. Thursday, you know, all of a sudden becoming back fit, Friday training properly, and then Saturday playing.
No.
Nowadays, this is over because you've got a GPS, so they know exactly how much you run at each session. They tell you the target for this session is X amount of kilometers, X amount of sprints. So there's no longer like an ability to manage your efforts during a training session, which ties into the fixture congestion, no, in the end, because you can no longer hide. You know, nowadays you constantly monitored every step of the way when you train, when you play, when you don't play. And it's tough. And it's tough also mentally because you're constantly on. You know, you're constantly on, monitored. It's a bigger pressure, I think, on them.
If we, okay, that's an interesting one. If we loop this into a bit on what's going on right now in the world, I mean, football is always part of a bigger technological development. Obviously there's a massive AI hype going on. We saw Apple with the launched those VR glasses just last week, even, or promoted them. Let's tap into the first one, AI. Do you feel that the AI field is also affecting the player domain, and are you facing any new opportunities for that, new challenges? Could we first from Alex's perspective?
Well, look, I think there's a massive opportunity for the industry as such, right? And I think this is that we're sitting on one of the largest data lakes of probably one of the most interesting group of people in terms of high-performance athletes. What we haven't managed is we haven't managed to actually connect our different islands of those who actually collect the data of the players, right? So the data will stay in the club environment or at the league environment. Data is not shared. Maheta talked about portability. Players can't take it from one club to the other. We don't connect the competition. We don't have a data sharing ecosystem which allows us as an industry holistically to exploit and to actually mine the value, both individually as a player, but also collectively as an industry of what we actually have. And that's the connection to AI, because in order to make machine learning work, you need to, and now I think that's the geeky part. It's almost like when you work for a trade union or in the industry, and you're probably much tech savvier than we are, you need to become almost a software engineer to actually understand the problems. But that also tells you how important tech and innovation has become in the industry, right? So the biggest problem is that we need to label data. In order to actually make sense for machine learning, you need to basically label the data. And we don't do that. And we don't have the ecosystem to share. Yeah. But what the biggest leap was now, and that has to do with this jump from 130,000 data points to 8 million data points, is that we're not just collecting simple tracking data anymore. We're actually collecting very advanced volumetric, biometric, skeletal data for the players. At the moment, we use that for refereeing purposes, semi-automated offside. So when you watch the Qatar World Cup, you will see the recreation of the body of the player when you see in screen to explain the referee decision. Okay. And it's almost the real-time avatar of the match situation. What you need for that is the limbs of the player, right? So
you have specific points
skeletal
in the body?
tracking via cameras. So the player doesn't even see it. It's under the roof of the stadium, right? So, but obviously from a player perspective, now if we would be able to create this ecosystem, if we are able in the club environment to label data, and you then have predictive technologies with AI, which basically forecasts performance, which forecasts injury risks, then this is extremely sensitive from a player contract, negotiating, career perspective.
Do you think that...
And that's what we need to put the player in control there in order to safely do it as an industry. And that's really the next frontier. Before we talked about image rights, now we talk about data rights.
Because the clubs are mostly the users and the owners and the generators of the data, right? So
not the owners.
Yeah, okay. But they are the ones that are using the data a lot. That on a daily basis, most professional teams have multiple analysts to understand, okay, how can we increase the performance? Do you feel that we can get to a point where the club would know, hey, this player is already has peaked on its performance, therefore we're going to give him a lower contract value and has information in that contract negotiation that the player wouldn't have yet? Is that something that you foresee happening, or anyone who wants to take this question?
No, I think it's a very good question. I mean, the reality is that I think data and artificial intelligence is used a lot in terms of scouting. So in terms of determining who will end up coming to my club. We see that a lot in England now with this new kind of generation of owners who rely heavily on data. I find it interesting because ultimately what I've seen myself is that data is helpful, but then the difference between an average player, such as when I was playing, and a top player is decision making, is how he makes decision, and I'm not sure whether data is capturing that as well as it should. So it's interesting because I think it will create a tension because ultimately for players to be signed, they need to be data proofed. If you're data proof, it means that you're meeting certain standards, then you become predictable. If you become predictable, that's not what the football that I fell in love with.
The uncertainty of outcome is one of the key characteristics of the game.
So what you see is more and more very talented people being sidelined because they don't fall into the pattern that the data say are the one that work. No? So is it really the football that we need to go into? You know, and I'm not sure whether we're going to the right direction from that perspective. You know, you become standardized, you become predictable.
Yeah.
If you become predictable, that's not what I actually love. No, and I was having a good conversation with Arsene Wenger one day, and I was telling him how his team of the Invincible, they had maybe 7 players that were winning games on their own, doing stuff that you would not possibly predict. And it wasn't just Thierry Henry. It was Ljungberg, it was Pires, it was... You know, if you look at teams nowadays, how many of them do stuff that really kind of surprise you and make you kind of fall in love with the game? I think it's a concern. I think it's a concern, a bigger concern as to where we're going as a direction of travel as an industry.
And is that something you think that you could teach the clubs more as well? That club analysts are now, I know quite some analysts as well that get hired by clubs that have no previous experience in professional football yet. They are really good at data analytics, but they miss obviously what you do have, that experience as a football player, and you know, you're mentioning Thierry Henry as well, very intuitive football player. That's not something that cannot be captured in data. Do you feel that there's a tension there? We're trying to explain too much with data.
What you have is that nowadays the people who do recruitment are engineers. And again, I'm a lawyer by trade, so I'm not criticizing engineers, but so right now the people who choose the players are engineers.
Yeah.
But I think what the data don't tell you is that one thing is to play for, you know, a small club in Spain, but that guy who is performing well in that club in Spain, when it comes to Galatasaray and plays with Ali Samien, it's a different experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And whereas you're able to perform in, you know, in Valladolid in Spain, when you come here, the pressure is different, the environment is different, and that's what data does not capture. And I think there's a tension now in football where you've got people who believe in the traditional way of looking at football, which I think is probably outdated, but then other people just think that they can do everything with data. And I think there's a space in between where you can use data very smartly to enhance what you do, to do a first filter. I think there's a big use, but without using the element of, you're talking about young, volatile people between 20 and 30 who are like this in terms of emotionally, in terms of their environment. And if you don't capture this properly, you're missing a part of it. Yeah. I think.
I feel like you want to add something.
No.
No?
Spot on.
Cool. Then we covered that topic as well.
I'll give you a $5 later on.
We have 5 minutes left, so I want to bridge this a bit into the commercialization of data as well, because obviously there's, we already discussed, a lot of player data being captured. Amazing source for media, for fans, like I said before. How is that, first of all, I think the rights are being collectively bundled and then priced and sold to the right party, whoever, what you guys are involved in. Do you feel, can you tell us a bit more about that? And later I also want to ask, do you feel that we can also we get to a test case somewhere where a player is actually thinking of selling his own data to, I don't know, whoever a commercial party can use that?
Well, look, I think historically the industry has bundled all the different revenue sources together, right? And then this is paid out through salary
attention field. Yeah.
and contracts to the players. That probably has worked to some degree when we talk about event data and very simple two-dot tracking data. Now when we talk about the advanced new data capture, which comes into the industry, then you can't just collectively merge that into the overall revenue stream. I think you need to find the technological possibilities to directly involve the players, that players directly benefit from their personal skeletal biometric health data being used. And then it's up to the players, right? I mean, I'm sure we're not far away from, you see that in other sports, and I know that those discussions are going on in football as well, to monitor the heart rate of the players, to show that on broadcast during match situations, such as penalty kicks, counter-attacks, free kicks. Look, personally, morally, ethically, I probably wouldn't do it. A lot of players, or some players, would do it if they feel the value they get for it is right. The important part is that I think we need to create a very player-centric, direct conversation with the players of what they feel comfortable with and how you actually put them in a situation where they can decide what the data is used for. And the same it happens in a club environment, right? The club wants to use the data for research, ask the player. I think the last time, I don't know when it was in England, and what clause is in the standard player contract, but I think, or I would guess it's quite outdated, and it can't capture today's tech ecosystem, and that's why I think we have to get on the front foot there.
Yeah. You want to add something?
Yeah, I think the opportunity for us as a union is being able, so once you've established what data is collected and you're comfortable with the players commercializing it, I think the opportunity is for us as a union to become an aggregator of rights and becoming like the one-stop shop place to go if you want to have that data. And I think what we're obsessed about going forward is pursuing opportunities that only make sense collectively.
Yeah.
So you can go to a Zlatan, or you can go to a Messi and saying, it's not you as Messi that I'm interested about. It's the data that you generate, and it's irrelevant if you're Messi or Zlatan. Is the data. The data aggregated and collectively. And to get that, you come to FIFPro, you come to PFA, and you have that one-stop shop of aggregated rights that then can be used elsewhere. So it means you're not competing with the opportunities that the data gives to the players individually. You can have your own deal, do whatever you need to, but we want to offer you the possibility to create a new pie that does not exist, with like opportunity that only makes sense collectively and without like a name attached to it, but rather the data that you generate as a player. I think this is the next frontier for us as a union.
And how do you ensure that players indeed do that they choose the unionization of these rights instead of selling it for themselves? Is that captured? Is that sort of
because
captured in a standardized form of a contract, or?
Because you tell them that right now you don't have that opportunity.
Yeah.
Because the insurance company that would buy this data doesn't want to know about Alex or Maheta. They want to have those data aggregated, clean, and in a way that can be commercialized. So it's an easy conversation because you've got zero. If you agree to do that, you create a new opportunity that we're going to be sharing, and then you don't have the debate as to, are the rights of Alex more valuable than the one from Ebru? No, there's no discussion because it's just the data.
No.
It's not, so I
Yeah,
think
so it's
that's
anonymized and
that
therefore
you're
it
having.
becomes usable
Yep.
in that respect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think we have to round up considering the time. Do you guys want to have a final word? Do you want to add to the conversation? Do you think that's valuable for the audience?
Well, look, I think we signed with FIFA last year, September, ahead of the Qatar World Cup. We published a Carta of Player Data Rights in collaboration with FIFA. I think that was the first step to actually recognize very basic privacy rights, data rights, which exist in public law in many countries around the world, also in the football industry. And based on that Carta, FIFA then also developed the FIFA Player Performance Application, which was used for the first time at the World Cup in Qatar, where basically players had direct access to their performance data after the matches. The same will happen now at the Women's World Cup in Australia. For us, it's really important that this is just not the first step, right? I outlined a little bit that many other steps in terms of data standardization, how we manage data, how we manage technology have to follow. And that's something which will be with us over the next decade. So I'm really happy actually that we have a forum here also with the World Football Summit where we can discuss that, and that we have an audience who actually is interested in that geeky topic. And yeah, look, we will continue.
Yeah.
And whenever you have questions, contact the unions, and they will happily share information with you.
Maheta, final words?
Yeah,
You
no,
want to add something?
I'll just say that I think the time of players just receiving an amount of money and being told go and play and shut up, I think it's over. I think it's a generation of players who I think are smart, they're informed, they're educated, they understand, they want to understand more about their rights and what people do with their kind of data, and hence there's an opportunity to grow the industry together. I don't think that there's a competition here, there's an opportunity to grow it together, but respecting the fact that, you know, consent cannot be overstretched. And consent that you gave back in the days to this very little clause about data is just no longer what is needed nowadays. So we need to have a conversation, an honest conversation as to what does the market require, and then let's see, you know, what data is needed to achieve that. But I think it takes a bit of honest and transparency in terms of how we approach this whole discussion.
Nice, exciting times up ahead, I believe. So that's good to. For now, I want to thank you both for for sharing your thoughts on the topic of innovation in football, specifically from a player perspective. Fascinating. What we tend to forget is that players are also humans, and we only see them as football players, but of course they're also humans. And we had a fantastic conversation, backstage on that as well. I think that's a very good job that you guys are doing, protecting the rights of these football players just beyond them as football professionals. I want to ask the audience to give a round of applause to our panel. And I want to thank you as well for being with us this early. It's a hustle with traffic to get here, but good to see you. Most of you people made it out here. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.